I guess I want to find a place where you can talk about what you're more familiar with than like what we did here. But just offhand here, like us grinding up the duff like this,
Yeah.
by hanging out on it for a whole summer. But now we're going to give it, say, 4 years of break.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more sun. There's a lot more poop. Some of it got a little leached, but it didn't wash away. Deer poop, goat poop, a little bit of rabbit poop. Some rabbits visited and checked out what we were giving to them over the winter, because I was here in the winter doing the red maples.
Are you following any basal area tables?
So we took, I didn't do basal area, I just did diameter breast height of each tree. So we recorded diameter breast height, height to top cut, diameter of top cut. We tried to count the rings. The red maples, it's kind of a guess. We couldn't see them that well. But, so you have some idea of how old the piece was that we cut off at the top, and how long the top was that we cut off. That's what we recorded. So, and we recorded which quadrant they were in.
So,
we might have recorded north-north, like north-north, northeast, like which quad of the quadrant. But they weren't.
Are you managing for tree volume here, or are you managing for?
So this is being managed for fodder, only for fodder.
Firewood.
No, fodder for animals to eat.
Fodder.
Fodder to eat, for them to eat the leaves. So almost all the wood is still here. There's a friend that's getting snaps for sides out. I will maybe take some firewood out, but I have such a surplus of firewood everywhere because I cut things for the goats. And I burn very little wood. I have a very well insulated house. So I do cook on wood, but that's like goat brush. Like if I carry them fodder, I can almost live off their brush pile that ends up at their paddock for my firewood. So there's going to be a lot of long-term new duff here. Eventually.
Okay.
We tried to stack things so we could still get around and not be quite as much of a connected fire hazard.
So what's your concern?
So I guess I want your reactions as far as what it might change about the soil.
Well, you've got a very specific purpose. You're managing this vegetation to do the foddering and for your livestock. You've opened up the canopy. You've removed some amount of the biomass as vegetation, which is the most nutrient-rich part.
Well, they ate it here.
They ate it here, and they pooped here.
We took away very little. Yep.
Did you harvest animals? Is this producing animals or?
It's producing milk.
Producing milk. So
yeah, we're taking some goodness off for sure.
Okay, so that's probably a minor export of nutrients. So then, based on what you said, most of the nutrients are staying here. Open canopy like that means this is nice and warm. So unless it dries out, and it's not going to dry out very much sitting right here. It's probably
except that was dry for the last 4 summers.
Bone dry.
Bone dry.
At the end of the summer.
No.
All summer.
1 year was dry by June. The ash trees weren't even finishing leafing out. It was so dry here. We've had really bad droughts.
16?
15 or 16.
16. Yep.
16.
So,
but they were all really bad here. Stockton had rain, we didn't have rain. Montville had rain, we didn't have rain.
Yeah.
4 years straight.
Yep.
This is the good year.
So, generally speaking, though, it's a relatively moist habitat.
But it still was wicking up. Like it still didn't look parched.
Sure, right.
The way clear cut did.
So it's decomposing organic matter pretty fast compared to the intact forest. So over time, the percent carbon in the soil is probably going down compared to
even with all the life that lives in that decomposing stuff.
Yeah, because it's gaining its energy by living off of the carbon that was fixed, breathing it out, that goes to the atmosphere, and then it recycles.
Right, but you also, because of that, might get more growth, because there's more nitrogen.
Oh, yeah, you definitely
and that growth is carbon, too, so I didn't know if those two balance out, or even get ahead.
They can. This doesn't look like it's growing biomass so fast that it's
not yet.
Right.
But by year 5, it will be.
And that could be. It would seem more like you're decades away from
really getting
biomass
to that
production
place.
Exceeding the rate of efflux out of the soil from soil respiration, root respiration, what have you. So but nutrient-wise, because all of that's going on, there's more nutrients, and it probably
Kind of
wasn't
more in available form.
in a more available
Yeah,
form,
yeah.
right? And so it's being recycled faster, and the microorganisms in the soil are able to use it and recycle it faster. So, as far as a longer-term trend, by that I mean a couple of decades,
Right.
You're probably on the downslope for carbon. You're more than on the upslope. When you opened up this canopy, you jumped up in nutrient value, the availability of nutrients, and that'll be sustained over a long period of time.
So what I've read is that a side canopy takes like 30 years to close.
Okay.
So, and this would be similar.
Yep.
Probably.
Yep.
And because I'm kind of a long-term thinker, and so all these sprouts that are coming up, I can choose and make them, 8 feet apart, and then pollard each one of those, and have this whole understory of poplar pollards and other bushes that are useful to us. So I can have this be very thick greenery, a lot of foliage diversity, but it's going to take a while, like you said.
Right.
So there's a loss at the beginning, but my impression was if we can get it where it's foliage diverse and the leaf surfaces are catching all the sunlight in a very efficient manner, just because they say that leaf height diversity correlates with biodiversity, and my impression is that biodiversity also correlates with carbon sequestration, and all those growing parts are all sequestering, so it's very efficient at that point.
It's getting more and more
sequestration.
efficient the farther down that
Right,
system
but then we're kind of keeping it at that state of, I think, a high level of efficiency. But that was my impression. But
no,
Yeah.
if I'm following what you're asking me, I think that's correct. Having
Yep.
the faster you close the canopy, the better. And it's mainly a temperature
Right.
thing.
But it can be closed as in solid up there, or it can be closed as in every inch of sun is used, but it's all different heights.
Yeah. So as a soils guy, I'm going to say it doesn't matter where it's closed. You can put a barn roof over it, but stop the
There's only
sunlight
so
from
much
hitting
sunlight,
the
right.
forest floor, because that raises the temperature. And you've got a Q10 that makes it really fast as far as
Right.
how
So
more
let's walk out
quickly
there a
it
little bit,
decomposes.
because I want to look at how much the forest floor is covered right now with greenery.
On a layman's level,
Sure.
is there any way to take any measurements out here and compare it with some measurement in here as far as all this nutrient difference?
In the soil?
Well, yeah, in the soil, because that's the only thing you can do, I suppose, other than measure the weight of the leaves and everything else. But she's interested in the soil. Is there any kind of a measurement that she can take?
Sure. There's lots of them.
Well, I mean, without having tons
laboratory.
of instruments. I mean.
Yeah.
Well, we
How
can
about
certainly send
pounds of
samples.
instruments? How about pounds of instruments?
Well, have you been to Harvard Forest?
Yep.
Okay, you know what they do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is examine the soil, feel it, and make a guess at how much organic matter is there.
Right, and
It's
you
kind
can
of-
also look at what's growing in it and see how happy
Oh,
it is.
sure. You can interpret the landscape and how it's responding, for sure, and that's what
Mostly
folks
what
like
we
you
do.
guys all do all the
And you
time.
can interpret how much the goats want it, because they go for healthy plants.
But outside of taking it back to the lab and doing at least a quick, carbon test and available nitrogen, something like that, in the field, it's really just interpretive. And it mostly is a function of organic matter, so taking a look at it. So you can interpret what's, growing on the site, and a big impact on productivity in these systems, depending on what you want to grow on it, is the acidity. And so then you can't look at the soil very well and interpret that. If you see the morphology, you can. But you can tell by what's growing on it. So these soils aren't that acidic if all of this is growing on it. These were all spruce fir flats.
But it was a lot of fir that we cut out here.
Yep, and the fir doesn't
It's
necessarily
here.
have to
You
be
can see
growing
it.
on acidic soils, and I doubt it would be in this kind of bottomland. You've got
Right here.
a lot of anything that's more poorly drained collects nutrients. Anything that's
Right.
better drained
Right.
leaches nutrients out. So
And did you have a question?
Well, I'm
kind of work. Yeah.
I was just
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
wondering if you'd be willing to, as long as everyone else was interested in hearing this too, just like the kind of describing the relationship between the atmosphere, the tree, and the soil, and how the exchange of yes,
Yep.
everything that's going on, just so that you can kind of a little
Refresh.
refresher.
Okay.
Pressure.
And there's probably more biologists here that can do a better job, but these guys in the back can take over when I lose my voice, which I'm going to try and do quick. So the atmosphere is, a very tiny amount CO2. It matters a lot relative to climate change and stuff we've all heard of.
Right.
But that's the energy currency. And so photosynthesis takes place. It captures carbon dioxide using sunlight, CO2, and takes nutrients and water, and creates organic materials. This biomass, it lives and then it dies and comes back to the ground.
And it releases a lot of water. I want to put that in because that's important to climate change as well.
What?
The transpiration.
Sure, yeah. I'm just following carbon
Yes.
right now.
Okay.
So,
Sorry.
and then the biomass comes back to the soil. It starts to decompose. Bacteria and fungi in the soil are using the carbon that was fixed and captured for their energy, just like we're doing right now. And so we're digesting whatever, munchies we had. That's organic carbon. We're oxidizing that. We're releasing it back as CO2. And so,
So that's why when the sun is coming through an open canopy, it's releasing.
Exactly.
It's not as much sequestered carbon because there's more activity and they're releasing.
right.
That.
We're making the microbes happier because it's warmer.
Right.
The hotter it gets, it's compost pile kind of thing. So as it gets warmer, microbial decomposition happens faster and faster and faster. And so the rate at which CO2 is leaving the soil increases. If you close the canopy, it's cooler underneath, temperature goes down, that rate declines. And the amount of carbon that's in the soil is simply a balance between, my lungs haven't caught up yet, so bear with me, balance between how much the biomass is drawing down, so the fixation of carbon, most of that's just photosynthesis, and the rate at which it's decomposing, which is sending it back up. And so there's
Right,
constantly...
but they're also dropping dead matter on top.
But it might not be decomposed.
The net flux of
Right.
the ecosystem is a function of those two gas rates.
Basically like the
And
ratio.
what's happening on the inside, you're foddering what biomass is falling to the ground. Those are all internal to the,
Okay.
the
Yep.
system
Right.
loops that eventually balance out as either adding to what's coming in or adding to what's going out as the gas. But if the ecosystem is accumulating carbon, that means it's fixing it faster than it's losing it. If it's being depleted, that right now is probably being depleted in carbon because the carbon in the ground is being respired. I was going to say respired.
Well, and there's a root dieback
faster.
that happens.
Right.
It's supposed to help resiliency to drought and resiliency to flooding also.
Yep.
Root turnover of trees is supposed to help both those things. So basically, the soil is a better sponge and better aerated.
Yep.
All that root die-off and then regrowth, root die-off and regrowth, and that happens a lot with pollarding because in these cycles you're making the roots die back and then regrow
Yep.
along with the top.
Does that explain that?
Yes.
Okay.
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Did I get it right? I'm going to pick it.
So I've heard
Right.
different opinions than what you're offering. I just want to say that about where that balance is.
So if someone
And-
thinks that's accumulating carbon.
Well, we don't. I doubt that it is yet.
Right. Yeah,
No.
I doubt it.
But let's go look and see how
Okay.
covered the soil is with greenery, because I was surprised how, it looked really bare last summer when we were trampling everything. All
Okay.
the ferns were trampled for the whole summer.
Is that when the pollarding took place, was last summer?
Most of it took place last summer.
Is this a hybrid soil right here? You can-
No.
Oh, what soil?
Right over there,
Yes.
along the edge?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first couple days.
Soil. So hydric
Yeah, of
soil
course.
Seminar.
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, and I knew it was.
Very poorly drained, and somewhat poorly drained that are one of the legs of wetlands. So it's a hydric soil. It needs to be a hydric soil. Kind of catch-all term. Yep.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. Those goats,
And then these
Okay.
will
because they're a little deprived on on woods.
But you've
Kinda
tuned
like-
your goat's palates.
Yeah. So I
Kinda
wanna
like what the
I wanna
moose do,
say
then.
that leaf out. I've been keeping track of what I feed the goats for like 8 years, and the last few years since 2012, it was later by a day each year in the spring, and then this year it was later by 10 days than last year. So it's 1 day later, 1 day later, 1 day later.
Leaf out
Leaf out
here.
here.
Of
Well, I
the
mean not on
trees.
this spot, but I mean where I've been cutting for goats.
Okay.
And then this year, 10 days later than last year.
Everything's late this year.
Everything is late. So this is really late.
Yep. This is
We
really late.
always have had, this is my birthday today. Thank
Happy
you for coming to
birthday.
my birthday party. And we've always had red currants ripe on if someone made a cake. And this year it's strawberries. And the red currants aren't even full sized yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we were a
So
little
why do
worried.
you think it's later each year, outside of this year, which is
Maybe the Roman calendar's wrong and there's a different calendar. I don't know.
okay, so
Well, I mean, it was really cool
this year?
this year.
Yeah, no. Besides
spring.
this year, it sounds like
Well,
you
it
were
was later
saying
the other years.
it's progressively getting later
By
and
1
later.
day.
Oh, okay.
Like,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, creeping.
Yeah. Okay.
And then this year was this big jump.
All right.
So I don't know. I just know that what I fed, when I fed the beech leaves and when they stopped eating them, this year they stopped eating them way later because they harden off and then they don't want them. The
Yeah.
hogs eat them all summer. They have tannins. The goats don't.
Yeah.
Rabbits don't. Everybody else doesn't except the hogs on beech.
So the leaves came out
Even
later
in
this
Sweden,
year?
they eat them as a spring
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, because it was a really
Yeah.
wet late.
So and these came up later. So these are like, you know, it looks like June here. Like these ferns will be much higher later. And I suspect we won't see any bare soil despite that we trampled all this stuff. I think these ferns are going to be covering in another month.
Of the forest and the soil biome after that, from what you understand, like, I don't know, I wonder if you just have any opinion about, like, maybe how one could help to encourage like healthy regeneration of soil health after that, especially if maybe it's been clear cut many times over the years, or if just like letting it kind of naturally do its thing is just as beneficial as perhaps taking action.
Like, is there something you can do to improve what happens?
Clear cutting, of course, is a loaded topic on lots of different levels. And some of what's running through my mind is that's a great question. Some of what's running through my mind, though, are, okay, what's the context? Was it a monoculture before that? How was it managed for the rotations before that?
Yeah, and we're going to go look at the clear cut.
What are you trying to return to? What do you define as soil health in that context? Which may be what sort of is popular now as far as soil health. We're living in an era of lately a renaissance of soil health to a soil scientist.
So we're lucky to get you.
Yeah,
on demand.
it's a happy time because people are talking about soils again.
It's the good old days.
It's a good, right? Yeah, exactly. So people here have more expertise on forestry to respond to that. With all of that hand waving, if you if you have a Doug fir or a spruce fir forest that's pretty much a monoculture and has been, and it's naturally regenerating that way, and you come in and you clear cut it, and it comes back to that forest, there's probably a period of time when there's greater biodiversity, greater soil health. As the understory for us rubus and the Northwest, I don't dare guess what would be, but I've been on a few of those sites and forget what I was looking at. But there's a lot of biodiversity, and so there's going to be a lot of biodiversity in the characteristics of the vegetation that's falling to the ground and decomposing, and so therefore there's a lot more activity in the soil. So that, again, carbon's being. But there's a lot more diversity in that biome because the food is so different. If it comes back eventually, whatever the primary canopy was, recaptures the site several decades down, and you're back to a Doug fir or a spruce fir forest, that's going to acidify the soil. It's going to create a relatively uniform kind of organic material, and your soil is basically going to go back to the way it was, sort of, before the harvest. Depending on how it was done, if your interest is in carbon, it may be a long time before you recapture the carbon you lost during that period of time. Or nitrogen, it might be an issue. So the timelines for those are all different. Bottom line is, eventually, you get back to where you started. Does that mean that soil is, do you have more or higher soil health? That's on the eye of the beholder. It's where you started. But if you want more soil health, then do what she said. Have a storied forest with a variety of species. Biodiversity above ground is going to give you biodiversity below ground every time. And in the current concept, the modern concept of soil health, what is that? We've talked about soil quality and those kinds of things forever. The notion is that it's not just the physical, chemical, and biological. It's that altogether it functions as an organism unto itself. And from that standpoint,
with many parts.
With many parts,
and
right?
Lots of life.
And lots of life. So the biological is really important. And the more vital that biological component, probably, the greater, the more robust people probably would say is the soil health. And in order to achieve that, then I'd strive for biodiversity in what you're growing on. But if you want to go back to where you were, to recapture the soil health that was lost during this big disruption, then, time will allow it to take place. If you want to speed it up, we're loaded with industrial foresters that know how to speed up the cycle to go from, mature spruce fir to mature spruce fir so that they can harvest it. But you will recapture that.
Now, sometimes here there's some places that had a lot of fir needles. Mostly it's where there's been a lot of fir needles that I just see it very bare, and the little herbs do not come up for a long time after. And Dave Roque said, well, maybe you should put your pigs there. And I put the pig, and they had nothing they wanted because there was no life under there, so they didn't do it.
Yep.
It's like there's a stagnation. And when I've cut the fir and made sure the branches don't drop their needles, when I at least cut it, it comes back quicker.
Yep.
It's definitely a sterilization of those fir needles.
And I'm going to guess it's a pH effect.
Yeah.
So the coniferous needles are
so
acidic.
Putting a bunch of lime might help.
Putting a bunch of lime or deciduous vegetation in there might help.
Getting some maple leaves over there.
If you want to speed up, regrowth of vegetation, then if somehow you mechanically mixed it, run your pigs through there for exercise or something, whatever works, because the contact between the needles and the soil will speed up the decomposition.
Yep. Let's just walk through here to some different soil that's
Would anyone like to dig a hole?
I have to pass.
I didn't take agronomy.
You didn't take agronomy. You're not qualified.
Oh, that's good. Just take that up.
we have it.
Yeah. So
There's a rock. We're in Maine. You can tell we didn't leave the state. We're losing your nice orange.
yeah, that's okay.
We can see it down here though.
Yeah. So we like to look at holes in the ground as soil scientists. Until I had my bicycle and crafts 2 years ago, I used to dig them.
A moment of honor that soil that I just moved probably had sat there a really long time. Sorry, soil.
Right.
Sorry, soil.
Is this epic?
Well, not longer than 10,000 years. So, not too bad.
Not much in 10,000.
Right, yeah. It goes quick. So the soils in Maine are mostly glacially dominated, and I'm going to say this for the folks that are from other places. And kind of the northern glaciated part of the planet in temperate zones is full of these materials. Glacial till is the dominant soil material. I think you asked me how would you know we were walking in, and I said glacial till means the ice melted and it just dumped it on the landscape. And so there's no mixing, there's no sorting. You got fines and coarse materials, and mostly you've got rocks and boulders of all sizes in all positions in the soil profile. And so as you walk around, you'll see rocks and boulders on the surface, and if you dug a hole, you'd find, little rocks and big rocks, and completely random, because there is no sorting or stratification. There's glacial outwash, which is when the meltwater from the ice carries out the stuff that could have been tilled, but the meltwater works it. And in Maine, I actually forget how many of you from Maine. How many are you from Maine? Okay. And so in down East Maine, we've got blueberries on blueberry barrens, and they're mostly sandy glacial outwash because it was all water worked by meltwater from the ice.
So they don't have the boulders and the rocks as much.
No, they don't have the fines as much in those. The fine materials kept on going and became our mud flats out here, and the coarser materials got left behind.
They still have the rocks.
But they still have the rocks because the meltwater had a lot of energy in it at that point in time, and so fine particles wouldn't settle out. It wasn't until you got out to sea that the water kind of calmed down, and now you get marine sediments. And if you think you went out to the middle of Penobscot Bay and you cored, what do you think? Right now, and none of us have probably done that. Maybe some of you have. But if you thought of that, if you envisioned doing that, what would you envision? I'd envision this mucky, fine textured stuff at the bottom, not
Similar
rocks
to,
and
like,
boulders.
a fertile delta zone.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
One
Material that's settled out of a water column, in the same kind of process. So we have.
Or sort of like my alluvial stuff where the stream drops.
Yeah, so that's more modern, but it's
That's more
the same process
not
taking
the glacier.
place
That wasn't
by
the glacier.
fresh
That
water.
was, this is current. That was the glacier.
Right, that was the glacier. So we have glacial outwash, which are like the blueberry barrens, and the other one that's of note in Maine are eskers. Eskers are long ridges of really coarse material that came out of the ice, and what happened is meltwater created these little tunnels in the ice as the ice was retreating, and it had a lot of energy, and it's like putting your finger on the thumb of a garden hose, it speeds up. And so as meltwater trickles down to an area of preferential melt in the ice, creates this little tunnel, carves it out, and it's rushing along with a lot of energy. It carries a lot of material with it, and then eventually the ice backs up and loses the energy, and what's left is this core of really coarse stuff. And the farther back the ice goes, it drapes on top of that sandy sediments, but the fines never get dropped out. They go out to sea and become the marine sediments. So in Maine, they're kind of important because we have a network of these eskers that run from the northwest to the southeast because the glacier retreated that way.
Good railroad beds.
And they make good railroad beds. We got aquifers out of them. We put cemeteries on them.
They build houses.
And
they grow trees pretty well.
And they're really financially important.
Sand and gravel.
Right, sand and gravel. So you talk about mineral
mining.
Right, exactly.
So the eskers were originally the path of least resistance?
For the meltwater
It was like
coming
a
out of the
stream.
ice that was carrying a lot of the mineral bed load.
Yeah.
And everything just
And
So
then
instead of the stream cutting a path into the ground, it cut it through the ice, and it actually made more ground under it by dropping stuff.
Right, so as the ice was melting, it was delivering water and the sediment. The sediment stayed, the coarse stuff stayed.
Yeah.
And as it backed up, as soon as the ice backs up from the point, or melted away and exposed that channel, obviously the energy of the water just goes and it starts to drop finer and finer materials. And so the typical esker has a core of really coarse material and then finer and finer sand and gravel. And on the top are bedded sands, like layered sands, but it doesn't get much finer than that. The fine materials that were in that got washed out to sea, and so if we go down to Belfast and wait for the tide to go out, or for Mainers, if you go down to south, or to Portland, driving into town when low tide, see those long gray mud flats, that's all the fine material that washed out of these uplands. So basal till dominates, or glacial till dominates much of the landscape and most of the interior of the state. We have these eskers, and then we have spots that have outwash. Along coastal Maine, and we're in the zone, but we're not in marine materials here, it's something called, here it's called the Presumpscot Formation, but it's a marine parent material because when the
And when you
ice...
say here, you mean not here, because we don't have it, right?
I'm saying, I forget what I said, but anyway,
all covered.
we're in a zone that was all covered by ocean water at a time when the ice was retreating. When the ice advanced, it pushed down the landscape, and basically it went out to sea, and then it started to warm up. The ice retreated, it melted faster than it was advancing. The ice is still there advancing, it's just, warm enough now and getting warmer fast. So, as the ice retreated, the landscape was pushed down, so the ocean was able to follow in the ice to a much higher elevation. So all of this area, including here, was underwater. Now, some areas, a lot of areas that were underwater, collected the marine sediment. They were underwater, just like out to sea right now, and so the fines settled out, and so you've got this silt and clay dominated parent material. And a lot of the soils all along coastal Maine, all up the Penobscot watershed, where we are at the university, is full of we're on marine parent materials in much of the university. And so those are the soils that people talk about, having poor drainage and drainage problems, etc. Tight soils, clayey soils.
But they also hold nutrients long.
They hold
To
nutrients.
get them to be aerated.
Almost any,
Adding enough organic matter.
right, almost any poorly drained soil collects nutrients. And if you want it to be productive in certain ways, if you want it to be productive as a wetland, you're good to go. If you want it to be productive to grow corn, then you're going to have to aerate it. Right, then you have to
Pile the
aerate
rest up.
The glaciers leaving behind all of this sediment as it's moving on, under the glacier before it began to melt and move and go on, was it scraped down to bedrock, or were there soils, or depends on what was what?
No, the glaciers, as they moved across, they scraped up, not down to bedrock, they scraped up bedrock. So Mount Katahdin's got a flat top, and it was a lot higher back before the ice rode over it. So that's a lot of the debris. Yeah.
It came from them scraping off mountaintops.
Right. They picked up all the soils that were here, but they also ground up and scoured lots of the landscape. And so that's
it's kind of like whatever the soils were like before the glaciers. It's totally different.
Everything's reset.
Totally reset.
Right. May not be different.
It might be just like
May have done that before.
We may be back to where it used to be, but it resets everything. So none of the soils we have in Maine were here before 12,000 years ago. Everything was reset.
Or it's like maybe similar matter, but in different places.
Exactly, yeah. So most of the state is glacial till. We've got glacial outwash as eskers and these outwash plains that are kind of unique and important features. And then along the coast, there's a lot of marine sediment. I'm actually a little surprised that there's not any here, but there's lots of places that there's not, either because...
Belfast is very inland for the coast.
True, that's true. It's protected.
And it goes right up.
Either because the marine that was on top of it eroded away, usually as part of the immediate post-glacial period, or the meltwater during that period that the water was here didn't have much of a bed load, so it really didn't accumulate much at the base, and kind of depends on ice dynamics and stuff that other people can tell you more about. So those are the kinds of parent materials we have. Here, it's almost all till, based on what Shanna had said, and the guru of soils in Maine, Dave Roke, was here with her.
2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and so
then apparently, otherwise it would have been the same. Right?
Yeah, so then the differences between soils really has to do with how deep are they and how well drained are they, and that's going to give you the different soil series. The named soils are primarily based on parent material, climate, and drainage. And so what's changing here really is depth and drainage.
I've heard him talk a number of times, and each time I think I know more, but it's hard to get it all. But he talks a lot about oxygenation, too.
Yeah, and so that would be like if this was underwater, it would turn gray because this oxidation would leach away. No?
Yeah.
Right?
Without oxygen in the soil, it couldn't oxidize.
Right.
Right.
So that's an indication of oxidization,
Right.
which means there's oxygen.
And if it oxidized and then water came, so sometimes there's a layer up high where the oxidation got leached out because of the water coming up seasonally. And that tells you there's seasonal water presence if you've got that high gray layer.
Yeah, it's a groundwater podzol when it does that. Yep.
Groundwater, what's it called?
Groundwater podzol.
Podzol.
P-O-D-Z-O-L.
P-A-D?
P-O-D.
P-O-D.
Yeah, it's a Russian word. So when I'm walking around as far as what are the differences here, and I was asking you what what were the different soil series, if this is a Tunbridge and something. Did you say Tunbridge you had? Yeah. And so you had a
Mostly Tunbridge.
Yeah, so if you had a Tunbridge and and what was the other one?
I have to grab
Yeah, that's fine.
I had a lot of other things going on.
So most of us think about soils, us being soil scientists, think about soils in a framework that we call a catena, and a catena is a family of soil names, and they're all the same parent material. They differ by drainage, and they're the same climate. And so here, it's pretty much all the same parent material. I mean, it's our farm. It's the same climate. So they differ by drainage. And so if there's a different soil series name, it's largely because of drainage. Now, drainage may be affected by the thickness of the soil or the proximity along the slope, but nevertheless, it's just the drainage that's differentiating the different soil types.
Right, and I don't even remember if they have different lines around, like a flood zone up front near the driveway.
Yeah, that might be an inclusion.
There's a lot
it may
of
not be big enough, right?
I was going to say there's way more kinds than what's probably in the soil book, because they don't do every inch.
Well,
right.
And there's a lot of variation here.
Dave Roach will say that right up front, is that those soil maps are just starting points.
Yep.
And he likes to dig a lot of holes.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, to illustrate that, so I have a row of pear trees out back. Let's start walking toward the clear cut.
Oh, before we
Can
go.
we talk about this first? Yeah. Tell us more about this.
So this is, the top of a soil profile, a classic forest soil profile. You've got fresh litter here. As it begins to decompose, it forms the O horizon. We call it an O horizon. Technically, we talk about an OA, an OE, and OI, so 3 layers. And that just has to do with the degree of decomposition. The farther it goes, OI, it still looks like it's fibers or needles or branch. OE, you can't tell what it is anymore, but if you rub it between your thumb and forefinger, it's got a lot of fiber in it. So a lot of the structural material hasn't decomposed. And then OA is the most humified. It's the most decomposed. And each layer is real, and it's different biologically, chemically, nutrient-wise, what have you. A long time ago, we were doing studies on remote forests of lead accumulation.
Which I'm definitely curious
as
about.
a result of the, we used to burn fuel that had lead in it. We stopped that in the 70s, but it transported long distances and accumulated in lots of places. And so you could see a bump in the OE layer more than the OA or the OI because of the
lead used on potatoes and used on orchards and in Maine. Arsenate of lead.
Yeah, that was as a pesticide.
Right.
That wasn't the long-range transport. Right. So point being, those layers are real, and then that's a pretty acidic zone. It's got typically it has the highest available nutrient concentration. So if you're going to ask where's the most available calcium or the most available potassium, and certainly the most available nitrogen, on a mass basis, pound for pound, where do I get the most? It would be right here.
Right at the top?
In this O. Yeah, no, in the lower
right
2/3
below
of the O.
this
Yeah, below
decomposing
this.
stuff.
So
now, when
this
Dave Roque said A, I always remembered agricultural A, but it's not actually labeled A for agriculture.
Right, agricultural A is an AP horizon, really. It's been mechanically mixed.
Okay.
And if it hasn't been mechanically mixed, I don't know that this has ever been...
As in plowed.
As in plowed, right, thanks,
and
right. So a little P.
Kind of a bottom.
Typical AP horizon is 6 inches because it's a moldboard plow thick. And it's mixed everything that was there. So it's usually the O horizon. If there's an E horizon, there's not really one here. There's the processes right there. But the E horizon can be a really leached out whitish layer. And then the brown colors start below that. And so if you took that upper 6 inches and mixed it, year after year, you'd have the O, the E, and a piece of the B, and you'd maintain that as your AP horizon. And the little p is a subordinate distinction that stands for plow layer, exactly right. And that'll persist for a long
But the
time.
A doesn't stand for agricultural.
No, A doesn't stand. A is just, right, the nomenclature, the master horizons for soils are A, B, and C. Brilliantly named,
Right.
starting at the top. And the A horizon is the surface mineral.
And so I'm letting the ground sprouts go. Like, I guess if I cut all the ground sprouts, maybe it'd have more chance of sprouting. But it's such an inefficient form to have such a small top and a long, long trunk. So I expect the energy to end up coming down on some of the trees and, sprouting lower. And ending up with a dead top that I shorten later. But basically, we cut out a lot of firs. We didn't cut out anything else.
Yep.
And we tried to cut a new wood, less than 3 inches. Some things we cut bigger if we thought it might go, or if it was dead, we just get.
So I'm sorry, but I might have missed some of what you were initially saying.
Yeah, so you haven't even had the introduction to this area. So
That's correct.
most people here kind of know what I've been doing, but maybe you folks haven't either. And tell me your name again.
Amelia.
I almost know everybody else. And I didn't hear your intro either. What is your interest or connection to the forest or
I have a
trees?
degree in forestry.
Okay. Oh, that's right. You were at the. Never mind. You were at the university before. And now what are you doing?
So I'm mostly an arborist, a little bit of a
Oh,
logger.
awesome.
And
So this will be very
I don't know what
curious
else.
to you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about what the arborists say who come out here. I'm just biting a tick. I'm sorry. I bite the ticks.
Might as well, they bite you.
I bite them harder than they bite me. So we got this SARE grant, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, and part of it was to do an acre demo area of a complete area that's pollarded for fodder, and that is traditional from like mid-1700s. They were I have a manual that said, divide your whole woodland into 3 parts. Swedish manual, handwritten. Scanned on Amazon for $20 because the picture is folded so you can't see it. And it's on my living room table if you want to look at it. But and do all of your tenants' lands too, because they're going to need their leaf fodder also, and you get a yield from an acre that's as good as, if you manage it well, as good as the best hay meadow. Everything everywhere says quality was not the reason people stopped doing it. The Industrial Revolution was. And before the turn of the 1900s, there was more leaf hay stored than grass hay all over Europe for cows and sheep and goats and hogs. And horses too, some. We did a lot of copper for horses. But we're starting with a 60-year-old growth or whatever. I haven't counted rings lately. I'm thinking they were it's about 60-year-old growth mostly, but they had been picking away at a little bit of firewood before I came here, so there were a little bit of openings, and I picked a little bit. I maybe cut 3 trees in here over the years before I did this, so there was a little bit of an opening in the middle. But generally it was getting towards closed canopy, and we had to get ropes up very, very high, and I just learned last year to cut those ropes. No, year before. And Josh, my intern, learned from me last summer, and the 2 of us did all this, except for 6 trees, which I got an arborist, who's a friend who taught me to climb 3 years ago, one of the 2 that taught me. I got him to do 6 trees in 6 hours with spikes, not having to put a rope up, and he said, Shauna, you've done a lot of work, and because I wanted to be affirmed. Like, how much work is this? Can he just, do half this area in a day, And, so his trees look a little different, and it was very counterintuitive for him because he's used to cleaning trunks and not wanting them to sprout. And the other arborists had told me, well, it's really different in here because even the angles of the branches are different. Like, they're always doing trees out in the open usually.
Who were those arborists?
So Adam Lynn of Lynn Tree Service, he lives in Monroe, and Eric Dan, and I forget what his business is called, but he's in Montville.
Okay.
Yep. And then Graham, what's his last name? lives right over. He almost the land he's on abuts me, and my goats go through it with me.
Nice.
But he hasn't been out here yet. And then Jacob DiGeronimo, you know him. Yeah, he's interacted but not been here. But he knows what I'm doing, and he brings me sometimes brush and chips. So chips to ensile. So we ensiled chips. We ensiled hand strip leaves. I just fed some dregs from last year to my cow at Mafka on Monday, and she devoured the ash that was overly fermented. So that's what we were doing. I was bringing stuff to other farms, bringing stuff to my farm, reporting animal responses to the plotters. And I was weighing the goats in and out to know the edible portion for this acre. And it came to like 1 pound dry matter edible portion per hour of us busting getting ropes up trees for an hour each tree, and then pruning it for less than an hour each tree. And we were really slow, you know. But and the first cutting, we measured the heights of what we measured the lengths of what we cut off. We measured the heights of what's left, not perfectly scientifically with we didn't drag the tape up there. We generally used our rope, which we knew how long it was, and measured the portion after it hit the ground. You know, we cheated. Sometimes we measured with our bodies as we climbed down. So, but we have ballpark heights and we were cutting off, you know, half the height sometimes. Often a third of the height.
What's the tallest tree that you've measured?
So you know what? I don't have my computer here, and it was last summer, but I'm going to say, as far as what we left, it's like 53 feet what we left. It's the taller end. This end tends to be taller, because there wasn't any cutting initially and pre-food stuff. And so anyway, that's enough. And I'll just say, ash, oak, and maple, we're pretty sure would be okay. And they seem to be. The maple sprouted first. I guess the maple and the oaks were almost in line. The ash, of course, reached out late, so it was like a little suspense, but then they're pushing out more than anything else.
Have you got any winter moths up here?
Yes.
Or brown-tail moths?
Okay.
The
There's
bad
another
ones that
winter.
are giving
What's the
people
winter
the
thing
problem.
that we were just talking about yesterday? We had Mike Parrish here yesterday at lunch, an
Rizio?
entomologist with the state.
Rizio, new
Parrizio?
entomologist. Yeah.
Oh, I wrote it down now. Okay, yes,
Just
you're
started.
right. Actually, that rings a bell.
Yeah.
Mike, he was awesome, but so I'm not coming up right away with the winter.
So I can fill in that
Yes.
brown-tail's been a bad problem this year,
Yeah.
particularly
about
closer to the coast. I don't know if you've seen it in
Well,
far.
you know,
You're pretty close to the coast. Yeah, brown-tail's
on
been bad.
Jesse Robinson's 3, there's some oaks that are completely defoliated.
Yeah.
Mine aren't completely, but I'm definitely coming upon the caterpillars.
Winter moth, though, I think has been less of a problem this year. And
Oh, I know what the winter was. It was a
Cautiously
whole
heard that-
different subject. It was winter ticks on moose.
Oh yeah,
They were
whole
talking
other thing. Yeah, but yeah, I think winter moth is in remission. So.
Well, the winter moth is down on Cape Cod. I don't hear much about the brown-tail moth, except
Right,
up
there's
here.
supposedly right now really a thing in New Hampshire and Maine, and that's it.
Yeah.
So they
And
haven't
it's mostly
tried.
the oaks, apparently.
Yeah, they
like
go
it.
for oaks and fruit trees.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Gypsy
you
moth is pretty well.
So what do you want to know about soil?
yeah, so let's go back to the thing we're supposed to be talking about, but I was forgetting that there's people here who don't even know
Well, the
my
only
general
quick
thing.
thing,
Yeah, no,
forgive me,
go ahead.
it's just
No, good.
so pollarding in
That's why we make it
25 words or less. Pollarding to
Would be
for
the
forage.
purpose, pollarding for fodder. So cutting things above browse height doesn't have to be tall like this, except that there wasn't. If you lop it off the trunk, it won't be able to sprout out of that bark, or if it does, it doesn't do well, and it gets a lot of rot in that big cut. And so I'm cutting where it's younger wood that's more likely to sprout well.
Okay.
But pollarding can be, these little short ones. And it was done in hedgerows, and there were trees. Before that, it was probably all through every field. There were bushes and trees that when they cleared the field, instead of clearing them, they pruned them. to let the sun to the grass. So they were seen as the fertility of the fields. They left the trees and the bushes, and they were important as fodder
It's to
and
promote
and-
sprouting.
to promote sprouting
leaf.
and sprouting that the animals can't reach. Fences are a more recent thing, and it's really handy to be able to have the fodder where you can drop it to your animals and not carry it anywhere, and or near the homestead to put in for winter, or they would make racks and stacks. And all the racks and stacks of hay, all were just a couple hundred years of popping something that had trees. Yeah, with mostly sheaves of leaves. I have pictures of like the twines along the trees.